Greetings and welcome to Module 7 of Diverse Learners. The final module, you did it! This is great. Although bittersweet, because this has been an amazing group to work with. I was a little intimidated by the numbers at first, I will say, but it's been great. So some quick reminders, and we'll jump into the content of our final module, the final paper, as well as your final peer responses are due on Friday, December 7th. That is the final day of the AOS course calendar. Right, I've set that deadline as late as possible to give you as much time to work on that end of the term. It is not possible to hand in the final paper late due to that end of the calendar. Now, if you have extenuating circumstances, which I hope nobody does, I'll do the best that I can to work with you on that, but there's a very limited window of time that would make something possible. Otherwise, we would be looking at an incomplete grade situation. So I sure hope that we see all handed in early with time to spare and no worries. But make sure that you are reaching out with those extenuating circumstances if you have them. Don't forget that Wednesday, December 5th is the adjusted deadline for the Module 7 reading response, right? Friday is the peer response. That's a little different than the weekly cycle of the other modules, but again, that's because of the AOS calendar. So make sure you've started that final paper early if you haven't already. Right, push yourself. If you haven't watched the additional video with Module 6, make sure that you do that. Make sure you've reached out with your questions about it as well. Again, full confident submission by all early. That's the goal. And please, once they've been submitted, be patient with us in the grading process. It's a very complicated task. We do so gladly, but it's a lot of final papers to read and to comment on. So I've devoted this final module to early childhood in terms of developmental diversity, and I've connected a short new literacies article to it. And many of you being early childhood or elementary ed, ECH or ELED teachers, as you know, the very nature of young learners is very diverse in its own right? From a standpoint of growth and development, presents a lot of changes. So, jumping right into Chapter 8, right? On page 159, they say the early years are rapid and dramatic and shape long-term outcomes, right? No pressure, elementary teachers, right? But it's true. Rapid and dynamic change, right? The implication, page 159 to 160, the implication of 13 million children living below the poverty line. The implications of 40% of children belonging to a racial or ethnic group that does not match their teachers. The implications of high-quality child care in the upcoming years. There are some profound implications of some of these social realities, right? Page 160 plus, right? Changing family structure. There is a lot of diversity in family structure that these kiddos come from, right? Single parents, living or being raised by extended family members, two mothers, two fathers, a transgender parent, right? In short, what's the take-home message? Well, we are advocates for our students and their identities and their family backgrounds, no matter what, right? Thus, we're advocates for their family structure as well. If we're advocates for our students, we're advocates for their identity and their family structure and how that all comes together. As I'm sure as many of you know, right, there are always surprises at parent-teacher conferences, but the more we reach out to that family structure, regardless of what that family structure is, the more we learn about them and their needs, right? Page 161, Head Start. It's great, great section. Brings these factors together. It sets kids up for greater success, right? Remember that these homeschool relations require clear and respectful communication. That's another good take-home point right there. Page 162. Developmentally appropriate practice requires several things: age appropriateness, social and cultural appropriateness, and individual appropriateness. Very, very fascinating group of three. Oh, I love what came after that, right? Learning through play. Play is essential. Thank you, Vygotsky, right? Learning through play, that's a pedagogical philosophy at our Child Development Center here on our campus, where my daughter went for a little while when she was little. Active learning, especially through learning through play, right? Page 164 builds on children's motivation to explore and experiment during their learning, and it lets us further tap their backgrounds and family. Allowing kids to explore and experiment and learn, it's great, right? Page 164, culturally responsive curriculum. Hey, harkens back to Module 1, right? Ladson Billings, jump back to Module 1 for a connection there if you'd like to. And page 165, the effective classroom practices on 165 and onward. I would suggest you take a look at that and ask yourselves, which do you use, but more importantly, looking at this list, which do you wish you could add to your classroom? I know looking at that list of effective classroom practices, that was one in particular that I remember thinking, okay, even with high school students, what do I wish that I'd done differently? What do my parents who were elementary school teachers wish they'd done differently? So, jumping into the article, new literacies for new learners. This is a great article. The first page just cuts right to it, as any good short article should do, right? Page 421 of the article. Young children are uniquely positioned to learn about new literacies, especially those related to the internet. Unfortunately, even from a broadly constructed, inclusive definition of new literacies, research and practice often has focused on older students. And this is true. There's a whole lot more literature out there on new literacies practices with older students, because a lot of those are tied into reading comprehension, right, and larger modes of thinking. So, furthermore, page 421, the interactive nature of digital literacies and the internet in particular is especially suited to the needs and learning styles of young children. It's imperative to integrate new literacies learning into all primary grade classrooms, because they are digital natives, right? But of course, we have to be very careful that we monitor and scaffold that use in appropriate ways, right? Consider the implications of being behind in reading by third grade relative to catching up, right? What if you were behind on new literacies and digital practices by third grade? In an age of digital natives, right? There are some very similar implications to that, right? Equity of access on page 422. Integrating new literacies into classroom instruction at a young age becomes especially critical for many economically disadvantaged students, because it helps close the gap that they might be experiencing in education, right? So, continuing with our constructivist thread from Module 6 on page 423, used appropriately, these communication tools support readers both locally and globally for learning. The highly interactive nature of the internet and other digital tools may hold special learning opportunities for young children that sometimes are overlooked in schools. I wonder where would project-based learning be, for example, without the digital age, right? I really think that they kind of go hand in hand. Consider their conclusion prior to the references. When you think about it, the short piece, really, it's a call to action, right? Each of you, as an educator and a Deweyan practitioner of your art and craft of teaching, has the potential to be an action researcher, right? Ooh, did someone say action research? That's my EDS class in the spring. Super excited. Some of you will be in it. My challenge to you as a professor, right? What new literacies approaches could you deploy in your classroom? What claim or hypothesis could you make about an anticipated outcome? Probably learning objectives, but maybe a little bit more fancy articulation of that. What evidence of the outcome can you collect and analyze? Most likely classroom assessment data. And what conclusions might you be able to draw that could further shape not only the teaching in your classroom, but possibly the field of education? In other words, reflective practice. They sound the call, right? So for those of you in elementary classrooms, it's worth asking yourself, how could I jump on board with some type of inquiry to examine this? If there are any types of digital practices that you are doing with those kiddos, why not examine it further, right? The dispositional article, Nurturing Young Readers, How Digital Media Can Promote Literacy Instead of Undermining It. This is a very interesting article, and Levine has co-authored with Jim G. On the connections between gaming and literacy, so it's nice. It's also good to give a bit of voice to a teachers association, and it's also a very engaging piece for practitioners. So that's why I like it. So is the opening scene familiar as teachers and or as parents, right? Page 2, right away, Belle inserted herself as a guide when the kids had the app repeating critter. They quickly came to an interesting question. Considering how the brain must be trained to read, are the kids deeply engrossed in digital classroom media experiencing a nurturing or a disadvantaging environment? They think it can be done right. So their thoughts, right? How can a media-rich classroom be nurturing? Well, so the portion of this, laying the foundation of literacy, that should be familiar to us all, I would hope, at this point, right? More than 2/3 of American students are struggling to comprehend what they read, and this can reach as much as 80% among underserved populations. That's page 3 of the article. Okay, so, struggling to comprehend what they read. Could this help address it, right? The precursors of reading begin in infancy, as they say, page 3 to 4. And once they enter preschool, children are ready for more specific emergent literacy skills. These are paragraphs that should resonate well with those of us, or those of you who have taken principles of literacy, cognition, or emergent literacy. And if you haven't yet, it's coming. Thus, the next 2 points that they have, it makes good sense to advocate for deeper and smarter investments in infant and toddler programs and how to make sure digital tools are harnessed and used in service of conversation and adult-rich interactions. So in other words, the technology should not babysit, but it should assist in meaningful ways with teaching and supporting a literate-rich environment. I note the Cooney Center survey on page 6 in the middle that access to phones and apps is not a magic solution for literacy, right? If the technology is not used properly in learning, it can actually widen the education gap, right? So then here's the really interesting part of this article, an analysis of 200 apps that serve learners from birth to age 8 in areas of literacy. Can you imagine looking over 200 apps, playing with 200 apps, testing them out, right? What a task that'd be. I mean, for some of us, we think that sounds like a lot of fun. But more than, they say on page 7, more than 50% focus on teaching children to recognize letters and sounds of the alphabet, with less than 10% of those apps focusing on comprehension, and even less focusing on fluency and expression. At this point in the article, that they note that the American Academy of Pediatrics did not seem to be much of a fan of screen-based tools at all. So, page 8. Digital media are not some monolithic force, as they say. Screen content, context, the way that kids respond to it, and the communities in which kids use media is what can make a huge difference, as they say. 2015, they note in this article, was a big year for screen-based learning research. And the Academy of Pediatrics even changed their tone a bit come 2015. Another thing that Bell noted, that handing kids ebooks, it's not enough. She needed to guide and become more involved with kindergartners as they use the Story app, page 9. So in other words, her explicit teaching presence as a teacher, right, was necessary. And this is not at all a new idea in literacy, that the explicit presence of the educator is necessary. The authors say on page 9, we need a third way, a new approach that's human-powered first and technology-assisted second. I really like the way they phrase that. But we already know this, right? It's kind of interesting that we need the teacher to come first and the technology to be a tool that the teacher uses. We already know this, but it's still good to see this in the article. Luckily, the next several pages unpack multiple perspectives with promise. Nosy cow, favorite of mine. Ultimately, the presence, as I say on page 12, ultimately the presence of teachers and adults makes a big difference. And then their final reminder, I think it's an unavoidable fact on page 12, the children and families of the 21st century will grow up with screens and digital media everywhere. And educators and parents will need new models for how to use these tools to promote learning. It's true. My son, practicing his piano, needed a metronome. He takes the iPad, he Googles a Google metronome, and suddenly he's got the iPad set to be his metronome. He did it instantly, right? The screens, the digital media are everywhere, and they're servicing all aspects of learning, right? This is what the kids of the 21st century are going to grow up with. So this, I think, was a fascinating article. A lot of points that hit home, but I think, you know what? It's possible. I think that's kind of the overall tone that it has. So It has been a pleasure to work with all of you. I've tremendously enjoyed this course. Like I said, numbers were a tad bit intimidating at first, but I tell you what, the email traffic has been very rewarding. Lots of email exchanges about ideas and decisions you've been making about papers, paper topics, things that you've read in the weekly modules that you've thought about with your classrooms. Module 2 was apparently a very popular topic in this class. I've truly enjoyed it all. I hope to hear from you further, further engage with your thinking, and raise the bar in Practicum 2, right? When that course comes up for you. I might possibly have a Practicum 2 video that I might pop in here with Module 7, but I like to keep this space available in case there are major questions about the final paper, like major trending questions, or possibly larger program level questions, things like that. Fall 2 has been going on in parallel with that course as well. Has been unfolding great as well. So I can't wait to see what you all discover on your final paper, your examination of diverse learners and dispositional reflection. Can't wait to see what you discover as well in the next iteration of your coursework when it's time for Practicum 2 for you as well. But in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out by A-State email with your questions, your comments. Keep in touch, and I'm looking forward to working with you again with your future scheduling of Practicum 2. What's up?